Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Parts of Britain are becoming worryingly.
And tonight, the Governor of the Bank of England spoke about the current anti-establishment feeling, which he said was fuelled by unfairness and inequality. Mark Carney said many had lost trust in the system and some were living through the first lost decade since the 1860s. Well, our business editor, Joel Hills, joins me now. This is very outspoken, Mark Carney, isn't it? Why now?
This is a really striking speech, Mary. It's a theme he's spoken about before, but the fact that it's happening now makes it that much more pertinent. What he's saying is, look, free markets and new technology have made Britain as a country richer, but there are a lot of people who are feeling worse off. They've been left behind. As he put it, trade does not raise all boats. And tonight he delivered what amounts to a pretty stark warning for politicians and businesses that unless there is change, capitalism, there's a risk it will fail.
Many citizens in advanced economies are losing trust in the system. To them, measures of aggregate progress bear little resemblance or little relation to their own experience. And rather than a new golden era, globalization is associated with low wages, with insecure jobs, with stateless corporations, and striking inequalities.
So the point here, Mary, is that free markets have created losers as well as winners, and quite a number of losers. Anyone who, since the financial crisis, has barely seen their pay rise. Any young person who finds themselves in a position where they're thinking, well, hang on, I'm worse off than my parents were before me. Now, he's also clear that there is absolutely nothing at all that the Bank of England can do about this unfairness. Let's call it what it is. It's for companies and politicians to do more. Companies need to pay the tax that they owe, and they should be forced to if they don't. Politicians need to do more, specifically around education.
Interesting stuff. Joel, thank you very much indeed.
Now, as Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney has done much to steady the national ship since this summer's Brexit vote. But in a speech in Liverpool tonight, he's admitted that workers are having to endure a decade of decline in real wages, the worst period since the 1860s, and is calling on the government to do more to tackle inequality in society. We'll hear from the Governor in a moment, but first, our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, has this.
Britain in the 1860s, a society damaged by years of financial crises, deep divisions between the rich and poor, and a decade with no wage growth. A decade which today Mark Carney invoked, reminding us it led to the rise of Karl Marx and his revolutionary demand to end all capitalism. Mark Carney isn't the first person to warn of a lost decade in recent weeks, but he is by far the most senior figure in Britain's economic establishment to do so. And with it, a warning that the Bank of England can only do so much to help. And now the heavy lifting to address Britain's long-term economic problems must be done by the government itself. Carney knows the Bank of England's record is in question, 8 years on from the worst financial crisis in living memory, and people don't feel any better off despite years of ultra-low interest rates, a criticism also echoed by the Prime Minister herself. But it's not a criticism he accepts. On the defensive today, Carney claims that rock-bottom rates since 2008 have actually raised UK growth by 8 percentage points. Without that, wages would have been £2,000 a year lower for every worker, and 1.5 million more people would have lost their jobs. But those actions have only bought the economy time, Carney says. Meanwhile, globalisation and free trade has led to cheaper goods, but jobs get lost overseas. While technology brings new opportunities, yes, but leaves many feeling increasingly insecure about their work. Long-term problems only governments can address. The problem with passing the mantle to government is it has very little money to spend. Increasing productivity is also notoriously difficult to do. And changing the nature of globalisation is a mammoth task for any government. And let's not forget the backdrop to Mr Carney's message. Trump, Brexit and a wave of populism, much of which is levelled at establishment politics and central bankers just like him.
Well, a little earlier I sat down with Mark Carney for an exclusive interview and I began with Italy. I asked if we here in the UK should be worried following yesterday's referendum result that there might be a crisis for Italy's banks and for the euro.
Well, governments come and go. Governments in Italy come and go maybe a little more frequently than in other countries. There will be a new government in place, policies in place to move things forward.
But we can't afford the euro to come and go, can we? I mean,
Well,
do you think is it another notch in its fate?
No, look, as Mario Draghi has said, the president of the European Central Bank has said, the euro is unfinished business. There are still a variety of measures that need to be taken by those countries who are part of the euro to make it durable over the long term. It is, of course, important political developments on the continent, and they're of a great interest. But in terms of the impact through our system, we're in an entirely different place than we were even a few years ago. And that's important. So your viewers can focus on more important things.
What you're doing today is delivering a sort of analysis of how it trickles down and how it affects the ordinary man and woman. And that picture is not a happy one. A decade which you have compared with 1860s, when, growth was zero, where inequality was great, and where technology came in and undermined some of what was going on.
Yeah, one of the things I think that contributes very understandably to the level of anxiety that households feel in this economy, in other economies, is the fact that it has, for them, been almost a lost decade of growth. Real incomes in this country have not grown for the last 10 years. And
but
the first time that
happened,
that is incredible. And that shines a light on inequality. Inequalities that exist in this economy, exist in other economies, and make people question what is being done to address those and what are the fundamental causes of those. Now, that light also gets shone on the Bank of England quite reasonably, and people are asking questions, well, are the policies of the Bank of England contributing to inequality or lessening inequality?
Well, the Prime Minister seems to have answered that with, yes, the Bank of England did contribute.
No, well, with the Prime Minister, I think the Prime Minister has been very clear. She senses these bigger issues, and she recognizes that a comprehensive policy response is required to address them. Now, the question that others have asked is, what does monetary policy do? And I want to answer that question very clearly. First off, monetary policy improves equality, in other words, reduces inequality when you've had a recession. How does it do it? It keeps inflation under control, and it keeps as many people as possible in work.
You're like a doctor who has some very bad news in the background, but is telling you the good news at the moment. Sorry, okay, you have a picture of you've saved the economy, we're in the good place that we're in, actually because the action taken was right. But underneath is a horror story, one in which you have gone back to the 1860s in order to compare it, in which growth is low, in which inequality is incredibly high, and inequality between old and young is also great, where you could actually say that quantitative easing and many of the measures you've taken have made the rich richer and the poor poorer.
Okay, well, you could say that, but you'd be wrong, John, because one of the things we're showing is to go back, and we've looked at the facts, and what's happened since 2010, since interest rates got to as low as they could be, and since quantitative easing began, what's happened to income and wealth inequality? It has gone down from a high level, but it has gone down. So what's happened is the biggest growth in income and the biggest growth in net wealth, basically paying down debt, has come for the least well-off segments of this society.
But forgive me, I've just come back from the Trump campaign, and the complaint they have is the same complaint that workers in Britain have, which is that their real income, their actual, they're still being paid the same as they were back in 2006.
Well, for the U.S. Median incomes, that story is even worse. What's happened is we've had very low growth. Growth in the UK has been better than others in recent years, but we've had very low growth over the course of a decade. People don't feel like they're getting ahead. And on top of everything else, people have an understandable anxiety about some pretty big changes in technology, the nature of work, how secure their jobs are, how secure their children's jobs will be. And so that requires a longer-term path.
The other factors in play are globalization and trade.
Part of addressing these issues is to call a spade a spade. Trade benefits the country as a whole, but it doesn't benefit everybody in the country.
It brings in cheap products that put people out of work.
It requires to fully distribute the benefits of trade. You need to redistribute some of those benefits. You need to help people reskill because new industries become more attractive. And you need to connect all parts of the economy to the global economy. And I think it's a fair charge. I don't think economists...
Sounds like you think Trump was right.
He's not right on the conclusion about trade and the contribution to the economy, but it's the whole suite of policies around trade and recognizing that some are left behind by trade through no fault of their own. How are they helped? How are they put in a position to get new jobs? And what's the role of various policies?
It seems that the scale of what needs to be done is never really recognized. I mean, if you are going to tackle people being thrown out of work by cheap products, new technology, whatever, you've got to have some way of pulling them back into the economy and uplifting them.
Yeah, well, two things. First, I think we should recognize, again, that there are more people at work in this country than there ever have been.
But not necessarily satisfactory work.
Both those statements are correct, and not necessarily in the jobs of the future. And so the question is, how do you best equip them for the jobs of the future so we can move to a post-services economy, a more artisanal economy that would be consistent with the new forms of technology. The other thing we can do is just clearly, objectively, dispassionately lay out the facts so that others, yourself, your viewers, businesses, political parties can determine how best to move forward from that point.
Where does Brexit fit into all this? If we're leaving the European Union, there must be a bit of a period in which we can adjust, and therefore a transitional period, and not a sudden death.
Well, there's... I think we should be clear. People use the term in different ways. The question is, would it be advantageous to have a period of time for firms to adjust, to restructure, after the deal is agreed with the EU? And of course, on the surface, yes, that's absolutely, it's desirable to function.
What happens if we don't get it?
Well,
if we don't get a sort of transition period?
People will adjust. I think what I would say on this point is, I say it's desirable. It's very much desirable from a European perspective in the financial services sector. The government has to weigh a whole host of issues for a whole host of industries and determine its priorities. And only the government can do that.
You started off your speech in Liverpool on the whole issue of the comparison with this lost decade of 1860. And that lost decade, you point out, gave us Karl Marx. What is our lost decade going to give us?
Well, that lost decade gave Karl Marx, but then it also gave subsequent decades of real prosperity and a better balance to globalization.
You always look on the sunny side of the street.
You can remind some others that that is true, even, but that prospect is there as well. There is a real prospect of an open, confident, trading United Kingdom.
But the world in which that is set looks as if it's spinning in an opposite direction.
It is hard to overstate the scale of technological change that has been happening, that will continue, and what it means for the workforce. And that is disorienting, and it also takes identities from people as well. So it's understandable there's this degree of angst. But there's huge opportunity with that. I mean, just the big picture that we've got 3.5 billion people who are plugged in to the sum of human knowledge at the click of a button, that a billion people have been taken above the poverty line in the last couple of decades. I mean, huge progress has been made. Since I was born, life expectancy globally is up 2 decades. I mean, this is enormous progress.
What if the other forces, which are beyond your control, nothing to do with the central banks, what if they don't step up to the plate? What if they don't come forward with the kind of measures you seem to feel are needed to secure a peaceful future?
Well, I'm going to end with your theme. I'm going to look optimistically and say that I expect that those will come into place. It will take time. It requires sustained effort. We will continue to do our job, and continue to provide that opportunity for those policies to come into place.
Governor, thank you very much indeed for talking with us.
Thank you, John.
I've been getting away with it